The views and opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of Union Broadcasting Inc., ESPN 1510, or its employees. The host is solely responsible for the on-air content.
This is Casey Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're telling stories of Kansas City's nonprofits to the nonprofit community and beyond. I'm Bobby Keys.
And I'm Ruth Baum-Biggis. It is good to be back in the studio. We've been out and about.
Yes, we got to go to some pretty cool places.
We did. Prairie Fire Museum we were at, learning all about the great, robust STEM stuff that they do. And Tom Bahali joined us.
Yeah.
And then we were at the library for our usual monthly gig down there, which was great. But now we're back. And we were back. Hi, Sterling. We got to give a shout out to Sterling. He's so fabulous.
He keeps us going.
But we have one of our stalwart regular guests who we haven't seen for the show for a while because he's so doggone busy, and that's Jeffrey Byrne, Dr. Philanthropy.
Dr. Philanthropy.
Hello,
welcome.
audience, and hello, Bobby and Ruth.
We're so glad
It's
you're back.
It's good to be back.
Yeah,
you know?
well, great having you here. We got a lot of stuff going on with, everybody's obviously in the giving mood. Everybody's giving. Nonprofits, they're collecting, or they're supposed to be. So how do they do it? And who do they do it from? And how do they get it? So and so we come to you for those answers. All the
skinny.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
we only have 3 more days of the year.
Yeah.
So, you better run out there and choose your favorite charity and make a gift or do some volunteerism or drop off some items and do some good.
And it's the last push of the decade.
right.
I've been hearing that used a lot. A last push of the decade, the last time to give. You can give next year, but enlighten us about year-end giving. I was sharing before we started some statistics that I found interesting, that nearly 1/3 of annual giving takes place in the month of December. That's amazing. Why does everybody wait?
Well, I believe that there is a psychology among Americans to give during the holiday season when families and take time to reflect about the year, think about their own abundance and their own situation, and then think about others. So it's very traditional to give at year end. And we're fortunate that Americans are trained to really open up their pocketbook. Plus, every nonprofit is out asking for a gift during the month of December. How many of us get our emails booked and our filled and our mailboxes full of direct mail during the month of December?
Everybody. So
Absolutely.
That being said, how do you, as the fundraiser, the organization, how do you differentiate then? How do you grab in all that noise?
Well, you've got to be very intentional, number one. And by intentional, I mean you have to really know who you're going to reach out to. And you can't do it just once a year. You can't do it just in December. You should be thanking your donors or alerting your prospective donors throughout the year. And because if you're only going to do it once a year, they will drop off of your donor list. So you can invite them into your organization. You can go out to see them. You can send them an email. You can make a telephone call to them. You can send a Hallmark card. And we want to send only Hallmark cards in the
Give
Kansas
the very
City area.
best.
Absolutely. And so there are a number of different ways of touching your friends at the end of the year and reminding them about, number one, how important they are to you, and number two, how important they are to your cause, and then third, about what you continue to have a need for.
So I guess going forward into that new year with that thought, is it better to, do what I see some nonprofits do and wait till the end of the year and then reach out to people? But is it better to consistently nudge people and send out reminders utilizing your email list and say, hey, just touching base and showing kind of like maybe some progress or impact throughout the year? Is that something that would help them as opposed to just dropping it on the last minute, in December and saying, hey, we're here. We've been here all year. Can you help me out?
Absolutely, Bobby. I think you should be in contact with your donor and the friends who support your organization throughout the year, because they they're thinking about your organization, or you want to make them think about your organization. You don't want to do it just during the holiday season, because there are so many other times. I mean, a lot of times what we do for back-to-school efforts, for educational efforts, is we time it around August, September, when kids are going back to school, or May, June, when kids are out of school. And that's a good time. Another good time is late January into early to mid-February to late February to remind your donors who you are. Maybe remind them that the end of the year was a good year, but we have the start of a new year. And by placing that solicitation in the month of February, you've given them some time to relax in the month of January, but then you're reminding them and putting your organization in front of them for the February time period. We used to do that with some direct mail programs that I was involved in. Some organizations like the Salvation Army, they might be soliciting you 10 to 12 to 13 times a year. Yeah. Some organizations are going to do it once. Our religious institutions are going to ask you every single week when you're in the parish, the synagogue, or the church.
Is there any research that shows like that magic number? Is that
times to touch a donor?
Yeah.
Well, I say you need to touch a donor at least 6 to 7 times a year.
Oh, okay.
So, you can thank them for their gift. You can ask them for a gift, and then you can remind them 4 times about what their gift did and what your other needs are. And don't ask. So
nice.
There's lots of opportunities to touch families and individuals throughout the year.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Is it that you said don't ask? It just kind of, is that what you mean by more or less just show your impact? Here's what we've done.
We call it friend raising versus fundraising. Yeah. Fundraising is when you make the ask. Friend raising is when you're talking to your friends and just letting them know about your organization. So, individuals and families are very caring people that we give. We give on the national average above what other cities and communities around America give. So we're a very generous community here in Greater Kansas City. But if you go out and look at the corporations and foundation gifts during the holiday season, it is not like they're not on a cycle of an annual end of the year appeal. They're more throughout the year. They're more steady. They have sort of a giving throughout the year process where individuals and families are really impacted during the holidays.
That's good information. I mean, that really helps out with your, basically your marketing. I mean, you need to understand that rhythm as a nonprofit to help push.
It's something that I think is interesting is in some nonprofits, they'll put development and marketing as one person, which I think is nearly an impossible thing to do because they are so much in each. At the same time, they almost do have to be at least working together because yin and yang. I mean, you got to tell your story in order to raise the money. Do you see that as a challenge for nonprofits trying to get their head around that kind of an approach?
Well, fundraising is storytelling. And, you have to be able to convey in a comprehensive but understandable way how you're impacting whatever your cause is and why it's worthy of support. You also have to be able to listen. As I like to tell nonprofit leaders is that 90% of fundraising is what? ? It's listening. Because, you listen, you present, and you listen, and you take in, and you have a conversation then about what the donor or prospect is interested in. And then through a really thoughtful conversation, you can lead the donor then to your objective of talking about the project that you're there to fund. So I think that, storytelling and listening is very important. A lot of CEOs and executive directors of nonprofits are talkers. They think that they've got to talk, and anytime you have a silence or a moment of pause, it's very uncomfortable. I pause a lot in my conversations with potential donors to see to stoke them out, to see what they want to say next.
Does it ever end up as a very quiet conversation?
You just staring at each other.
Lemons to lemonade,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We talked last year at this time about tax changes and impact. Now we've had 12 months.
Yes.
What have you seen out there as you talk with colleagues and with donors and organizations?
Well, the Trump tax cuts of December of 2019 did a few things. Number one, it put a lot of money into the wealthy, into their pockets. And many of those wealthy did turn around and give money out. It also provided some significant tax support in the year for families. But the lack of itemization for middle Americans did reduce giving last year by about 2%. And what we see in this year is that we see that there is much more effort being put into trying to get average individuals, middle-class individuals, to give money, because the number one area where philanthropy is coming from is the super rich. And the super rich are giving about 50 to 55% of every dollar. And what we've seen is diminishing returns on average Americans giving, both in amount and number. So that's really what we have to work on. Get average Americans out there as our listeners to this program to give to a program. So that's what we need to continue to focus on, is those individuals and those middle Americans that can make an impact.
How do you do that? There's that silence.
Where's the
That was a pregnant pause, Ruth and Bobby. How do you do that? Well, you just intentionally go out, and you need to go out and intentionally plan about how you're going to reach the average donor. And you can do that through email, through direct mail, through personal solicitations, through inviting them to your organization. Invite them in. Invite them in to see what you're doing. And those are all proven best practices that have worked for literally decades and generations.
We know we're a philanthropic community, and we've got great fundraisers here. What about fundraiser fatigue? I mean, I know I have friends who are in development. It's like they're sweating bullets till the end of the year, and then they maybe get 48 hours to breathe, and then they're sweating bullets again.
I think fundraising fatigue is, in a way, in the mind of the donor. We as fundraisers can't necessarily put ourselves in that position and say, well, since there's donor fatigue, we shouldn't go out and talk to our donors. We must go out and continue to talk to our donors. But I think that a healthy organization of a nonprofit is when staff have time to take care of themselves as well. Mm-hmm. And I hope during the holiday season that, those hard workers, whether they be executive directors or frontline workers in programs or the fundraising staff, they have time to take off a little time, re-energize themselves, get with their families and friends, because they'll be much more productive at the start of 2020, and they will be much more advantageous for the organization. So I think from a fundraiser's perspective, there can be fatigue on our side as well as the donor side. Mm-hmm. And I think both have to take a little bit of time to take care of themselves.
2020, the new decade, an election year. What, from your vantage point, Dr. Philanthropy, what can we expect? What can we maybe plan for as nonprofits or supporters of nonprofits?
Well, I'm very optimistic about 2020. First of all, our economy is it's up. The market continues to go up. Job market continues to go down. Then unemployment. And our economy overall, I do not believe, will go into a recession in 2020. So during presidential election years, normally the president, whether they be Republican or Democrat, and now President Trump, is going to try to do everything he and his administration can to prop up the economy during 2020. So I believe it's going to be a really good year for nonprofits and for fundraisers in general.
Now, do you think you get a lot of people who talk about right now. We're on that cusp, right? They can only balloon so much, or the economy can only be so good for so long. With possibly that in mind, would that be almost an empty? I guess an empty economy coming. With that, is there a higher chance of it bottoming out with that kind of tactic?
Well, Bobby, we can't plan for a recession from a fundraiser standpoint. So recession is, I believe, defined as 2 quarters of negative growth. And we've had a quarter this year, but it seems like we're out of that.
Yeah.
And as we respond to what the market and the economy does, then we just have to do better from a fundraising and a nonprofit standpoint. And, of course, when we go into a recession, then those hurt the most are the lower or the people who are served by nonprofits. They're going to need to be focused more on those individuals then.
So get out and give. At the end of the year, there's still some benefit to some donors in terms of tax incentives.
Yes.
But certainly big benefits to our hearts, right?
Yeah, that's right. Heart incentives.
That's right. And we all feel good when we give.
That's right.
You talk to any philanthropist, Warren Buffett, Bill and Melinda Gates, it's a really good, it's good for your body.
Yeah.
And it's not only good for someone else, but it's good for your body, mind, and soul.
And I will quote from a theatrical source when Dolly Levi says, money is like manure, it does no good unless you spread it around. So spread the money around, give generously, show why Casey cares. Thank you, Dr. Philanthropy, Jeffrey Byrne.
Thank you, Bobby and Ruth.
Thank you.